Great big thank you to you, Siri, once again putting on an amazing Bergen Exchanges that brings people from all over the world and from many different disciplines. That's what's so marvelous about this conference, is that I know that at the end of this conversation I will have learned from you so much, because you bring so much to the table in terms of your perspective. So thank you, Siri, for organizing this. Thank you to my co-authors, which include Siri, which include Marit Vinis, who you've just heard from, and which include Larissa. So thanks to everybody. We're going to be talking about constitutions. So we're broadening our scope now from 41 OECD countries, and we're moving out to the entire globe for the next couple of minutes. I'm going to tell you a little bit about constitutions, which of course we could spend weeks talking about constitutions, so I'm going to try to put it into a teeny tiny 2-minute box. Talk a little bit about where children have, what we know about children and constitutions, and then tell you a little bit about a study that the four of us have been conducting, where we're trying to understand whether children show up in constitutions, where they show up across the globe, how they show up across the globe, and then whether or not there's any mechanism to ensure that children's rights, which might be articulated in constitutions, have some mechanism for enforcement and accountability. And so this is some early material we're presenting to you. We welcome your feedback on it. So let's just talk first about what is a constitution, because it is many things and it depends on the country. In some cases, constitutions are these documents which explain a country's goals, its aspirations, its hopes to be able to be many things for its citizens. In some cases, it is a legal document, which of course is highly enforceable by various court jurisdictions. It certainly does define the relationship between the governed and the government, and it is messaging to other countries. We are a freestanding autonomous unit. These are our boundaries, and this is how we define ourselves. How we define ourselves. So, what about kids? Do kids show up in constitutions? Because constitutions are about the citizens of a community and what their rights might be, and so you do have to define what is a citizen, who is included in this constitutional frame. And what we know is that for a long time, in most governments around the world, the only folks who had any articulated rights were men, were white, were propertied, were moneyed. And that's not really including kids, or about almost anybody else. So things have evolved over time. I'm very glad to say history has been kind in this regard, and we now have a better understanding that human rights are more expansive than that. And so when we think about children's rights and whether they show up in constitutions, this is our goal, is to better understand in this long lineage in developing our understanding of human rights, what are they, who gets them, is to try to figure out whether children are actually included in our human rights community. And do they get rights? And what might those look like? So that's our purpose. Where are kids? Kids take up about 25% of the population in the globe. So do they show up in constitutions? That would be the question. We all are very familiar with the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, ratified by all of the countries everywhere on the globe, except for one outlier. Yeah, well, in Article 4, it really does suggest children have human rights, just like anybody else. And so if that's the case, then we should expect to see children showing up in all of the constitutions all across the globe. And so that would be our question. What do we know about constitutions in general? We know that prior to World War II, constitutions did not include kids. After World War, post-World War II, not one. After post-World War II and up to the development of the CRC, children do start to emerge. Many, many constitutions are developed, of course, during this period of time, as many nations are reclaiming or claiming their nationhood. And so in the development of those new constitutions, children begin to show up. And then we know that post-CRC, children show up even more. And so again, that gives you this sense of this arc of history going in a direction that we find to be generally attractive. There is some evidence to suggest that that some constitutions include parents as an articulated group. Some parents have rights, but most of those constitutions clarify not so much what parents' rights are as much as what their responsibilities are. And so a good number of constitutions, about 95 of them, indicate that parents have responsibilities to their children. These generally focused on their responsibility to make sure children are educated. That's interesting, that parents are responsible for children's education, given that we were just talking a little bit about educational systems, and parents don't run systems. A number do talk about parents' responsibilities to raise their children with morals or in a religious frame. But children generally have not been described in literature very much. A few studies have focused on European constitutions specifically and have shown that in European constitutions, children do show up as visible. They're present in constitutions. They are not necessarily granted much agency, but they are visible. So what are we trying to do? If we want to expand our analysis from just European constitutions, we want to understand the whole world, how are we going to go about doing that? So we were interested in whether or not children are visible in national constitutions. Do they show up? Are they articulated as a unique identifiable group? And then if so, what types of rights are they granted? Are they granted civil rights? Are they granted political rights? Are they granted economic, social, or cultural rights? And then next, how are constitutions indicating whether or not someone is responsible for ensuring that that right occurs? And that's really a critical piece of this. So we looked at 193 constitutions across the world. These are all gathered very beautifully at the University of Texas, where they have all been transcribed into English. They're all available as English language. They're publicly available. We were coding for anything that had to do with children. So you can see some of the words that we used: boy, girl, child, minor, children, what have you, to be as inclusive as possible. We had a very detailed coding scheme and a very well-articulated inter-rater reliability coding scheme to make sure we really were seeing the same thing among all of us. And then we took all of the rights that we identified that were visible, and we put them into these three buckets: civil rights, rights that protect individuals from discrimination, ensure equal treatment; political rights, whether or not children can participate in the political life of the country; economic, social, cultural rights, children's basic needs, their education, their health, etc., and then whether there was a responsible party. And in this, we were looking to see whether or not the responsible party was named, meaning the state is responsible for ensuring this right, or the family is responsible for ensuring this right, going back to the parents that I mentioned a minute ago, or whether there's some sort of a diffuse shared responsibility, which we'll come back to, because shared responsibility actually means that no one is responsible at all. Isn't that convenient? So, a couple of limitations. That's right, a couple of limitations. Constitutions tell us a lot, but they are certainly not exhaustive. Constitutions are the frame, and then underneath that there are so many layers of laws depending upon the country in which you live. So you might have a legislative body developing national law, and you might have a very large body of national law where children might be well articulated, but it might not show up in the Constitution. So we approach this cautiously because we don't want to suggest that if children don't show up in the Constitution, children don't have rights. They certainly might, at a national level at a state or jurisdictional local level. That could be possible. So we don't know anything about that. Apologies in advance. We also recognize that all of these are written in English, which is not necessarily the home language. And as we all know, translation misses so much subtlety. And so we're talking about documents that we're taking at face value, right? We're taking it at face value, how it was written in English by the folks that translated it. And so again, big caveat there, right? We included young and youth in our characterization, our coding, but young and youth might be 19, might be 20, might be 21. I don't know what young or youth is. We've been inclusive, and so that creates a little bit of a soft area. And then constitutional texts are widely debated in many cases. Let's see, what would be an example? In the United States, my country, the Constitution says ever so clearly, every individual born in the United States is a citizen. All persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States. That seems pretty clear to me. Some people who sit in a White House think differently. So interpretation is widely diverse. We recognize that. So this is our understanding of words at face value, which might be widely debated. All right? But I digress. All right. So what are some of the things we found? Actually, kids show up a lot. 92% of all of the countries that we studied, 193 countries, do include provisions for children in their domestic constitution in some way or another. These are the outlier countries where children do not show up, and we don't see a pattern to this. Some are old constitutions, some are new constitutions. Some are global north, some are global south. Some are industrialized, some are developing. So if you see a pattern to the countries that do not articulate children's rights, we welcome that. At the moment, it's not clear to us. Across the Constitution, across all of the countries we examined, we did see 20 themes show up. Now, a theme is not necessarily a right, but it nevertheless gives you some idea of the kinds of things that constitutions are articulating across the world. And you can see a lot of constitutions include rights to education. A lot of constitutions include rights to protection from harm or abuse or maltreatment. The conversation we were just having a few minutes ago. Special protections, employment rights, special judicial rights in the courts, discrimination, a right to development, to a name and a nationality, health or health care, family life, participation. The child's best interest is included in a number of constitutions, 28 of them, about 15%, not necessarily as a right, but as an indicator or an aspiration. And then you can see a few of them refer to the CRC directly, and some of them are quite clear about defining what a child is in terms of an age boundary or something like that, okay? Okay, now let's look at our three buckets. Here's our first bucket, which is the bucket of civil rights, and this might be a little bit on the small side, but among civil rights, we're trying to look at things that have to do with protecting children's personal freedom, equal treatment, discrimination, etc. You can see that about 2 of 5 constitutions include rights to protection from employment hazards, long employment, working conditions, laboring in unsafe environments, the child's age at which they can begin work, which the youngest is age 14 in El Salvador and Pakistan, going up to ages 16 in Poland. About half of the countries include a right to protection from harm, abuse, or maltreatment, typically from family members. about that 75%. An example might be Bhutan. The state shall endeavor to take appropriate measures to ensure children are protected against all forms of discrimination, exploitation, trafficking, prostitution, abuse, violence, degrading treatment, and economic exploitation. So you can see that some are quite expansive in what they're trying to protect in terms of children's harms. Some are more limited. In terms of political rights, we have only about 10% of constitutions, including provisions for children's participation in the political process. Some of these offer authentic, what I would call authentic participation, meaning voting rights. So at age 16, age 17 in Brazil and Ecuador, respectively, children are included as voting members of the public. As you can see, that's quite a minority of countries. Greece does offer children the opportunity to participate in party societies, but not necessarily in direct elections. And then here's Somalia indicates every child has a right to a good and righteous name and a nationality from birth. So you see language similar to this in many of the other countries that speak to issues of nationality or their naming. In terms of social, economic, and cultural rights, we really see this is heavily dominated by the area of education. So about 1/2 of constitutions include provisions for children's education. These are usually quite general. Children have a right to education. That's fine. Some are quite specific. So for example, in Egypt, children have a right to a religious education only. So that, again, every country is shaped by its culture, it's shaped by its history, it's shaped by its resources, it's shaped by its normative values. So that should not be surprising. 37 of the countries include provisions for children's right to health, and this is an interesting one again because we'll get to the question of how you ensure it, because they do include a right to health. But of these, only 16 include a right to health care. So it does make you wonder, if I have a right to health, how do I get it if I don't have a right to health care? And so, again, that's probably just using my American eyes, but it is a question to ponder. In terms of ensuring children's rights, we see that there are these 3 buckets again. Some are quite clear about articulating a state's right. Some are quite clear in articulating it's a family right, a responsibility, and some are quite diffuse. So, and I should mention that for this, we would look at the language associated with a rights provision and look at the language adjacent to it to see whether or not there was an insurance opportunity, an accountability opportunity. We recognize that what we may miss is that a preamble of a constitution might say all of the rights included here are the state's responsibility. So we would miss that since we're simply looking at the language that's adjacent, right? So here we do see that the state does take responsibility, particularly for judicial rights, right? Children should be separated from adults when they are placed in a locked confinement. Children should have different judicial procedures. Children should have different trained judges to attend to their judicial needs. So we see this as a state responsibility as well as a state right. We do see that the state takes greater responsibility for ensuring children's disability-related rights, for ensuring health care is typically connected to a state responsibility, to have protection and to have protection from abuse or neglect are generally in the bucket of a state responsibility. So here in Egypt, for example, it would say, the state shall care for children and protect them from all forms of violence, abuse, mistreatment, and commercial and sexual exploitation. So again, the clearly articulated that this is a state responsibility as opposed to a family or parental responsibility. When we go to, I think I missed one. To generic responsibility, we would see that this is sort of diffuse. So Colombia's would say the following are basic rights of children: life, physical integrity, health, social security, a balanced diet, their name and citizenship, to have a family, not be separated from it, care and love, instruction, culture, recreation, and the free expression of their opinions. So it doesn't really say who's responsible for ensuring these lovely, wonderful, aspirational rights, and then that raises questions about whether it is a right or an aspiration, particularly when you think about creating sort of a judicial framework for love or care, which are, you know, highly debated issues. Shared responsibility would be where it articulates that it's the state and somebody else. So the child's best interest, education, etc. The state, society, families. This is Cuba. Cuba's constitution grants special protection to children and adolescents to guarantee their harmonic and holistic development, keeping their best interests in mind in the decisions and actions that concern them. So again, you can see that this is a shared responsibility, which again sort of speaks to its aspirational tone and not necessarily to how you might bring someone to court to ensure that this occurs. So summing up, we do see kids are visible. They show up in many constitutions now across the world. From when we think about the arc of human rights, we should all celebrate this because this is an important development in the constitutionalizing of children's rights. But I think some of the language that you've seen so far suggests that children show up very much having symbolic rights more than material rights, in part because there often is not an indicator that there is a responsible party, or the responsible party is sort of generic, diffuse, and shared. So the question to think about is it the right thing to be articulating children's rights? If we're articulating children's rights, then do we have to articulate other people's rights? And who are we missing? So do we have to develop constitutions that have adults' rights and children's rights? Should they be different? Should it be different that children should be protected from abuse and violence? Shouldn't we all be protected from abuse and violence? And so it raises the question, is it the right thing to be moving forward to articulate children's rights? Because shouldn't we have the same ones for everyone? I don't know the answer to that. So it raises questions for all of us to ponder, and I'll leave it to you to figure that out.
I'm going to call in for a panel. Two people that are going to comment on it. So the first is Professor Stefan Schnur, who is the head of the Institute for Studies in Children and Youth Services at the University of Applied Sciences and Arts in northwestern Switzerland. And the other professor is Taya Pozzo, who is an emeritus professor at the Faculty of Social Sciences of Tampere University, as well as a professor here at the University of Bergen. Thank you so much for being here. So I'm going to pass on the word first to Professor Stefan, who has 5 minutes to make his comments. So please.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you to all of you for contributing to this really exciting event, the Bergen Exchanges. I learned so much here for the second time now, and also thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to comment on this paper. And well, I have tried to come to terms in a way with it, and I will show you what my terms are. I would start with saying, well, we can't say that constitutions don't matter. I think constitutions matter, and I would dare to say that many very distinguished people in this audience, and including myself, we have written texts that are excellent, but they don't matter in a way that constitutions matter. So these are special texts, and they have consequences. And I see the great value in your research in making the visibility of children in constitutions visible. However, I find that the findings are rather sobering. So I think the ways children are mentioned, I would regard it as problematic. And I think it is not only the lack of abundance of granting of civil rights, political rights, social rights to children. It is also, in a way, the sketchiness that show up, or you show in your research, about the hows and wheres children are mentioned. So there seem to be no patterns at all. So there is nothing systematic. So to summarize, I have three lessons that I take from your research. And the first is, when we look at constitutions, and constitutions matter, we can say that children in the world are not viewed as full actors, actors in the full sense. They are not granted full citizens' rights. They are quarter citizens, or not yet citizens, or becoming citizens, or whatever. Yes, we have this wonderful Convention of Children's Rights, which constitute human rights for the vulnerable group of children. But these children's rights have not traveled well over the 25 years now into the constitutions, and they have not been transformed from human rights into basic rights of states. So this is one of the findings, I would say. And the second is about the function of constitutions. Based on your research, I would argue that rather than in the granting of rights to children, the function of constitutions is in the withholding of rights from children. And constitutions contribute to this creation of an otherness of children. So they constitutions may be about citizens, but they also make sentences about children. So children are not citizens. This becomes very clear when it comes to political rights, and for example, voting rights. So voting rights, they have been in the early days, you mentioned it, restricted for people who are wealthy or have property, etc. They have been restricted along the sex. So this is behind us. Yeah. But age is still a pretext for not granting political rights. And it is widely accepted. It is taken for granted. 25% of the population of the world. To me it comes as no surprise that if we agree that constitutions are the texts that contain or organize basic binding principles of the state, of the relation of state to citizens and between citizens, etc., and they are, in a way, the basic principles of the societal order. It is no surprise that they also contribute to the generational order, which is very powerful, a very powerful concept. And they contribute to the generational order in the dominant form, so in the hegemonial form we have. My last point would be the research is inspiring insofar as it gives us also the idea or the consideration about what could we all gain if constitutions would be organized in a way that vulnerabilities would not lead to the withholding of rights in the full sense. So that's it.
Word to Professor Taki.
Thank you. And thank you, Jill, for your presentation and your co-authors for the inspiring paper, as you, Stefan, said. I find the paper extremely inspiring and groundbreaking. And one reason why I think so is that I'm more familiar with childhood studies. And in that field of study, they have years tried to position children as agents and forced us to look at their agency. And they have also studied the children's citizenship, very much in terms of lived citizenship. And there has been studies looking at how children are supported to practice their lived citizenship. But often the focus is on micro acts, especially in education. And I think that's all extremely important. But what I find so inspiring in your study is that you now take your look on the constitutions, which is so far away from the micro acts. I think both are important, but I haven't before read any analysis of the constitutions. And because I'm not familiar with constitutions, so I went to the library and took out a book, 400 pages. It's about constitutions, mainly only in Europe, so it's a narrower look than yours. And I tried to see how they approach children. I have to confess, I didn't read it thoroughly, but I didn't see the word children in the 400 pages. Then I consulted the index, and I tried to use the words which you used for your study. And I found children mentioned only once in the index, and that was, I wonder whether you can guess, it was child pornography. Which I found so interesting because you in your study mentioned that child maltreatment or these sort of problem approaches can somehow appear so often when you talk about children. So that said, I also have to clarify that I come from Finland, where the Finnish constitution addresses children as equal individuals. And then there is, just as you said, other pieces of legislation which then define their rights and other people's duties and so on. So that it's, from my national perspective, it seems very important to recognize that countries have different pieces of legislation. But I have one question to you instead of a comment. And it is, again, a Finnish question. Children's ombudspersons, they are the important actors of child rights institutions. The Finnish child ombudsperson reports the parliament every 4 years about the state of children's rights in Finland. So the last report is in 2022, and she presents 3 recommendations or suggestions what the state should do differently. One is about child welfare, the other one is about education, but the first one is about the Constitution. And what she says, I read the summary. The Ombudsman for Children finds that the best interest of the child, being a primary consideration, must be included under the basic rights in the Constitution of Finland. And when you read the report, the arguments are somehow they are somehow linked with the experience during the pandemic, COVID pandemic, for example, that so many decisions were taken without considering what they meant for children. And in her view, from the children's rights perspective, many other government decisions are done without considering children's rights. And that makes her suggest that child's best interest should be in the Finnish constitution. And now the question to you. I noticed that in 15% of the countries used or constitutions you studied, they had the child's best interest principle. But would you think that this is the way to go? Would that be the right way to make children visible in the constitutions? Would it just be symbolic, or would it have this material meaning which you and I think Stefan too were looking for? That's my question.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to give back the word to Jill, and then we're going to take questions from the audience. So you have like 5 minutes.
Don't you love Bergen Exchanges? This is so interesting. So a couple of thoughts. I have no idea, and perhaps my colleagues know more than I do, about whether constitutionalizing children's best interests in the Finnish constitution would have any material meaning, because ours was a study of all constitutions face value, and we don't know in each individual country how constitutions are interpreted, whether or not there are courts that can enforce these or not, and whether the courts function appropriately, whether the courts are non-corrupt. There are many characteristics that would need to happen. So I don't know whether it would make a difference in Finland. The fact that you have an ombudsperson, the fact that the ombudsperson reports regularly to a governmental body, the fact that that person seems to think that given the context of Finnish society, that constitutionalizing children's best interest could bring benefits, seems to be a signal to me that that wouldn't be a bad thing. So I think that's, but I do think it's really quite interesting, and it speaks back to our earlier conversation about our child protection typology and what is a child rights child protection system. That's one. When you see these sort of exemplars, that children's rights are elevated at the highest level. Yep.
But would that then mean that you wouldn't be optimistic to see that principle globally?
I don't know. Would I want to see that globally? Yes and no. These are such complicated issues, and this speaks to your comment also, Stefan. When Zaki was giving his presentation about child protection, he was reminding us that child protection is not a simple business. It is about fundamental principles that are in direct conflict with one another. The child's best interest might be very much at odds with a parent's and a family's integrity needs. That's complicated business, which requires a nuanced, thoughtful, thorough response. And so blanket statements don't necessarily help. They don't harm, but they complicate things. So bringing a child's best interests orientation to any constitution brings value, and it brings complications, because it will immediately mean that if you are developing COVID policies that have a child's best interests at the heart of it, it will conflict with other parties' needs and interests. That it will. And that will require subtle, thoughtful, nuanced, delicate. Delicate was the word Zaki used. I appreciate it. It was delicate, right? And that's very difficult. also, children's rights, to speak to your comments, Stephen, are complicated business too, right?
Yeah.
Because children's rights are, to put it simply, are along a spectrum. Some children, say infants in particular, need more protection than they need liberation. 17-year-olds need more liberation than they need protection. Depending, right,
Some.
depending upon the dimension, depending upon what you're talking about, right, and depending upon the child. But on a general frame, we have to develop policies, procedures, strategies for protecting very, very young children, because they don't have the same participatory capacities as a 17-year-old. And at the same time, we need to give those 17-year-olds more liberation, more freedom, more opportunity to participate, to be engaged, and to use their agency, because they have so much agency, and they don't need as much confinement of restriction. So children's rights is complicated business, from protection to liberation. So there isn't a single response to how do you respond to vulnerable people because of their age, maturity, development, etc., when they themselves are a diverse group.
I would like to respond, but I'm not. The audience is first, I think. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you so much. We're already a little bit overboard, but I'm gonna have to give back the word to Jill for like final remarks, answers, whatever.
So interesting. Are there any PhD students in the room? Good, because you have work to do. This is just our initial work, the four of us, muddling through to try to make some sense of this. So many of the questions that have been brought up here suggest the next layer. We need to look at the type of system. We need to look at individual countries. We need to look at the structures within constitutions. We need to look at whether or not this matters in terms of execution. We need to look at the organizations and whether it makes a difference to the way organizations, bureaucracies, people live their lives. Layers and layers and layers. We're on the first blush. These data are publicly available. We're happy to share our coding so that you can at least take off with the wings that we'll give you. And we hope to maybe return at a future date to give you the next layer, but there are many more layers to uncover.
Thank you so much. So we're gonna have